imagine, for just a moment, that tonight is the final night of the ancient world. Not the end of the earth, not a night of war or destruction, just the quiet ending of an age that had lasted for thousands of years. Across distant lands, ancient cities are slowly falling silent. Fires flicker beside sleeping homes. Somewhere, a lonely traveler walks beneath a sky filled with stars. And beyond the walls of forgotten kingdoms, the world continues to breathe, unaware that tomorrow will not feel quite the same. No one knows what is waiting beyond the darkness. Perhaps a new beginning. Perhaps another chapter in the endless story of humanity. So tonight, leave the modern world behind. Close your eyes and travel with me slowly and quietly through the final night of the ancient world. A night where creation, time, and the mystery of tomorrow come together beneath an endless sky. If this story helped you relax and drift a little closer to sleep, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss another peaceful journey into the past. And if you enjoyed tonight's story, leave a like. It truly helps the channel grow. Before you drift away completely, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Good night, sleep peacefully, and I'll see you in the next story. Long before the roads were filled with cities, long before towers reached toward the clouds, long before ships crossed oceans carrying people from one continent to another, there were only quiet lands beneath an enormous sky. There were mountains, there were rivers, there were forests. There were deserts stretching farther than any traveler could imagine. And above them all, there was the night. A deep, peaceful night filled with countless stars. For thousands of years, people have looked upward at those stars. Farmers watched them while waiting for the seasons to change. Travelers followed them while crossing empty lands. Sailors used them to find their way across dark oceans. And ordinary people, lying beneath the night sky, sometimes wondered the same simple questions. Who created all of this? Why are we here? Where did the world come from? And where will it eventually go? Our story begins with a traveler named Elias. He was not a king. He was not a soldier. He was not a famous scholar. He was simply a quiet traveler who loved walking through old places and listening to stories. For many years, Elias had traveled from village to village. He had crossed dry valleys. He had slept beside rivers. He had visited ancient marketplaces. He had spoken with farmers, craftsmen, shepherds, fishermen, and old storytellers. Everywhere he went, people had different languages, different customs, different traditions, different ways of understanding the mystery of existence. But Elias noticed something. Although people were different, many of their deepest questions were remarkably similar. One evening, after walking for many hours, Elias reached a small hill overlooking an ancient valley. The sun was disappearing. The sky slowly changed from gold to orange to deep violet. A few birds flew across the fading light. Far below, a small village began lighting its evening lamps. One by one, tiny lights appeared in the darkness. Elias sat beneath an old tree. He placed his walking staff beside him. Then he looked upward. The first star appeared. Then another. Then another. Soon the entire sky seemed to fill with them. Elias smiled. He had seen the same stars over deserts, over mountains, over oceans, over crowded cities, and over lonely villages. The places changed. The people changed. Generations came and disappeared. But the sky continued. An elderly shepherd was sitting nearby. He had been watching the sheep while the evening became darker. After a while, the shepherd spoke. "You have been looking at the stars for a long time." Elias smiled. "They are difficult to ignore." The old shepherd laughed softly. "They make a person feel very small." Elias looked toward him. "And is that a bad thing?" The shepherd shook his head. "No." He looked upward. "Sometimes remembering how small we are helps us remember how precious life is." The two men became quiet. The wind moved gently through the branches. Somewhere below, a dog barked once. Then the valley became silent again. Elias thought about all the people who had looked at the same stars before them. Ancient people whose names had disappeared from history. Parents who had once held their children beneath the night sky. Travelers who had walked hundreds of miles. Farmers who had prayed for rain. Fishermen who had asked for safe journeys. People who had celebrated births. People who had mourned those they loved. People who had wondered about the Creator. People who had feared death. People who had hoped for another morning. Different lives, different centuries, different traditions, yet the same sky. The shepherd eventually stood. "It is getting cold." Elias nodded. They walked slowly toward the village. The road was narrow. Small stones rested beneath their feet. The moon had risen above the hills. Its light touched the old walls of the village and turned them silver. As they walked, Elias noticed something unusual. Above one doorway was a small symbol. Farther along the road was another house decorated according to a different tradition. At the village center stood an old place of worship. People of different backgrounds had lived in the valley for generations. They had traded with one another, shared water during dry seasons, helped each other rebuild homes after storms, and sat together during difficult times. Elias found this beautiful. The world often spoke loudly about differences, but kindness was usually quieter. It did not always make history books. A farmer giving water to a thirsty traveler rarely became famous. A neighbor helping repair a broken roof rarely became a legend. A stranger sharing bread with someone who had none was usually forgotten by everyone except the person who received it. Yet, perhaps, Elias thought, some of the most important things in the world were never recorded. That night, he stayed at a small guest house near the edge of the village. The room was simple: a wooden bed, a clay water vessel, a small window, and a lantern. Elias opened the window. Cool air entered the room. He could hear the distant sound of water flowing through the valley. He extinguished the lantern. The room became dark. Then he looked through the window. The stars were still there. He wondered how many generations had slept beneath those same stars. And then another thought came to him. Everything he could see would eventually change. The tree outside would one day fall. The village walls would eventually become ruins. The road would be covered by dust. The people he had met would someday be remembered only by their descendants. Even the mountains, which seemed permanent, were slowly changing. Rain shaped them. Wind carried pieces of them away. At the world, do not only ask how long it will remain. Ask what goodness you can leave behind while you are here. Elias had never forgotten those words. He wondered what would remain after him. Not his clothes, not his walking staff, not the small coins in his travel pouch. Those things would eventually disappear. Perhaps what remained would be much simpler. A kindness, a story, a memory, a helping hand, a moment of peace given to another person. The thought made him smile. He pulled the blanket around himself. The village had become completely quiet. The river continued flowing. The trees moved gently. The moon crossed the sky. And above everything, the stars continued shining. Elias slowly fell asleep. He did not know where the road would take him. He did not know which ancient cities he would see. He did not know which people he would meet. And he certainly did not know what the distant future held for the world itself. But he knew one thing. The world was beautiful and mysterious and temporary. Perhaps that was enough for tonight. So beneath the ancient stars, while the quiet river moved through the valley, Elias slept, and the night continued peacefully around him. the night passed quietly.
And when morning arrived, Elias woke before the village. The eastern sky was still dark. Only a thin line of silver appeared above the distant mountains. He stepped outside the small guest house and stood beside the river. The water moved slowly between the stones. Nothing seemed hurried. The birds had not yet begun their morning songs. The village was still asleep. Next, he did not know which ancient cities he would see. He did not know which people he would meet. And he certainly did not know what the distant future held for the world itself. But he knew one thing. The world was beautiful and mysterious and temporary. Perhaps that was enough for tonight. So beneath the ancient stars, while the quiet river moved through the valley, Elias slept, and the night continued peacefully around him.
The night passed quietly, and when morning arrived, Elias woke before the village. The eastern sky was still dark. Only a thin line of silver appeared above the distant mountains. He stepped outside the small guest house and stood beside the river. The water moved slowly between the stones. Nothing seemed hurried. The birds had not yet begun their morning songs. The village was still asleep. Elias watched the first light touch the tops of the mountains. One by one, the peaks became visible. First, the highest ridge, then the trees, then the rooftops of the village, and finally, the river began to shine. He had seen countless sunrises during his travels, yet every sunrise felt strangely new. The same sun, the same sky, and still never exactly the same morning. Elias began walking along the river. As he walked, he noticed small things that were easy to overlook. A spider web covered with tiny drops of morning dew. A bird building its nest between two branches. Small flowers opening toward the sunlight. Bees moving slowly from one flower to another. A farmer preparing his field. A child carrying a wooden bucket beside his mother. Nothing appeared extraordinary, and yet Elias found himself wondering how such a world could exist at all. He stopped beside a flowering tree. A small bee landed on one of the flowers. Elias watched it for several moments. The bee did not know that someone was watching. It simply continued its work, flying from flower to flower, carrying what it needed, following a pattern that seemed older than any human memory. Elias thought about the countless creatures living across the world. Birds in forests, fish beneath oceans, animals crossing deserts, tiny insects living beneath stones, trees growing silently for hundreds of years, rivers traveling from mountains toward distant seas. The more he thought about it, the more mysterious the world became. Humans often built complicated things. Cities, bridges, ships, machines. But the natural world contained patterns far older than human civilization. A seed could become a tree. A tiny egg could become a bird. A cloud could become rain.
Rain could fill a river. A river could bring life to an entire valley. And the valley could become home to thousands of living creatures. Elias wondered about the beginning of everything. Before the villages, before the roads, before the oldest monuments, before human memory, what was there? He knew that different peoples had different sacred traditions and understandings about creation. Some spoke of a creator who brought the heavens and the earth into existence. Others used different stories and symbols to reflect on the mystery of life. Elias did not think he needed to turn every mystery into an argument. For him, the mystery itself was enough to inspire wonder. He looked toward the sky. The clouds were slowly moving above the valley. The morning sun illuminated their edges. He whispered softly, "Whatever the beginning was, it is greater than anything I can understand." Then he continued walking. By midday, Elias reached a small orchard. Rows of fruit trees stretched across the hillside. An elderly farmer was working among them. The farmer noticed the traveler and invited him to rest beneath a tree. Elias accepted. The farmer brought him fresh bread, fruit, and cool water. They sat quietly. For a while, neither spoke.
Then the farmer pointed toward the orchard. "Look at those trees." Elias looked. They were planted by my grandfather. "How old are they?" "Older than my children." The farmer smiled. "Perhaps one day they will be older than my grandchildren too." Elias touched the rough bark of the nearest tree. It was enormous. Its branches reached far above them. He suddenly realized that the farmer would probably never see the full future of the tree, nor had his grandfather. They had planted something whose life extended beyond their own. That thought stayed with Elias. Perhaps human beings were like trees in some ways. We entered the world. We grew. We experienced seasons. We gave something to others. And eventually, we left. But what we planted could continue. A child, a lesson, a kindness, a piece of knowledge, a memory, a good deed. The farmer broke the bread and gave half to Elias. The bread was simple, warm, fresh. Elias thanked him. The farmer smiled. Bread tastes better when shared. They ate together beneath the old tree. The afternoon passed peacefully. Later, Elias continued his journey toward the mountains. The road became narrower. The valley became greener. And the sound of the river grew louder. As evening approached, he reached a small wooden bridge. He stopped in the middle. Below him, the river moved over smooth stones. The mountains stood in the distance. Above them, clouds turned gold beneath the setting sun. Elias remembered something the shepherd had told him the previous night. Remember how small we are. Now he understood the second part of the lesson. Being small did not mean being worthless.
A single person might be tiny compared with the mountains, but a single act of kindness could change another person's entire life. A small lamp could brighten a dark room. A small cup of water could save someone suffering from thirst. A simple word could give hope. Perhaps greatness was not always measured by size. Perhaps it was measured by what one gave. Night slowly returned. Elias found a sheltered place beneath a group of trees. He prepared a small fire. The flames moved gently in the darkness. He warmed a little water and made tea. Then he sat quietly beside the fire. Above him, the stars appeared again. The same stars from the previous night. But tonight, Elias looked at them differently. He thought about the enormous universe, the countless stars, the distant worlds that human eyes could barely imagine, and the small planet beneath his feet. A world filled with billions of lives. Every person carrying a private story. Every family carrying memories. Every generation arriving and eventually leaving.
The thought could have made him sad. Instead, Elias felt peaceful. Because if life was temporary, then perhaps every moment deserved attention. Every sunrise, every meal, every friendship, every act of mercy, every quiet night. He looked into the fire. The flames rose, then disappeared. Another flame replaced them. Nothing remained exactly as it had been. And yet, the fire continued. Elias smiled. He pulled his blanket closer. The night became colder. The wind moved softly through the trees. Far away, an owl called once. Then silence returned. Elias closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he would continue toward the mountains. But tonight, there was nowhere else he needed to be. The river was flowing. The stars were shining. The earth beneath him was quiet. And somewhere beyond his understanding, the great mystery of existence continued. Elias slowly drifted into sleep. And beneath
the endless sky, another peaceful night passed. The next morning, Elias woke to the gentle sound of water. The small river beside his campsite had continued flowing throughout the night. It had not stopped. It had moved beneath the stars while he slept. It had moved beneath the moon. And now, beneath the first light of morning, it continued its quiet journey toward the distant valley. Elias packed his few belongings and followed the river. The path was narrow, surrounded by tall grass and small flowers. Birds moved between the branches. Occasionally, he could hear the sound of distant bells from a village somewhere beyond the trees. After several hours, the river became wider, and beside it, Elias discovered an old wooden boat. An elderly boatman was sitting near the shore. His hair was silver. His hands were rough from many years of work. Elias greeted him. The old man smiled and offered him a place beside the fire. "You follow the river?" the boatman asked. "Yes." "Where are you going?" Elias looked toward the water. "I am not completely sure." The old man laughed softly. "That is how many good journeys begin." They sat together for a while. The boatman told Elias that he had spent almost his entire life beside that river. He had seen children become adults. He had seen young couples become grandparents. He had watched villages grow. He had watched others disappear. And through all those years, the river continued. "People believe the river belongs to them," the old man said. "But it does not." Elias looked at him. "What does it belong to?" The boatman smiled. "Perhaps to no one." He pointed toward the flowing water. "Look closely. The water you see now will never return." Elias watched the river. The surface reflected the morning sky. Every second, the water changed. Some drops moved toward the sea. Others disappeared beneath stones. Yet from a distance, the river looked exactly the same. The old boatman continued, "Human life is like that. We wake up believing we are standing in the same world as yesterday, but yesterday is already gone." Elias became quiet. The words stayed with him. They crossed the river together in the old wooden boat. On the other side, Elias thanked the boatman. Before leaving, he looked back. The old man was already preparing his boat for another journey. Elias continued walking. By afternoon, he reached a small village. Children were playing near the river. Farmers were working in the fields. A woman was washing clothes beside the water. An old man sat beneath a tree. Everything appeared ordinary. Yet Elias now saw the village differently. Every person he saw was living through a moment that would never return. The child playing near the river would grow older. The farmer working in the field would eventually rest. The woman washing clothes would one day become an old woman herself. And perhaps another generation would stand in the same place. Elias wondered how many people had stood beside this river before him. Thousands? Perhaps millions? He would never know their names. But their lives had mattered to someone. Their laughter had mattered. Their struggles
had mattered. Their kindness had mattered. That evening, Elias camped beside the river. He watched the sunset. The sky slowly became orange, then purple, then dark. The first stars appeared. Elias listened to the water. It sounded almost like a whisper, a reminder that time was always moving. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he imagined every generation
that had lived beside the river. Farmers, travelers, children, mothers, fathers, merchants, old people. People who had prayed. People who had hoped. People who had cried. People who had loved. All of them had come and gone. And the river had remembered none of their names. Yet, somehow, the river carried their stories forward. Elias smiled. Perhaps humans did not need to live forever to have meaning. Perhaps a life was meaningful because it was given a chance to love, help, learn, and leave something good behind. The fire slowly became smaller. The river continued flowing, and under the quiet stars, Elias fell asleep. Right at dawn, Elias kept pushing toward the mountains. The road, just started getting steeper and steeper, you know? Trees were popping up everywhere on the hillsides. And there were these chilly little streams crossing the path. The air just felt so much cleaner and cooler. By the afternoon, Elias could finally see the mountain peaks. They were enormous. Their tops disappeared into clouds. He stopped for a moment. The mountains made him feel very small. Yet he did not feel afraid. He felt peaceful. An old shepherd was walking nearby with a small flock of sheep. Elias greeted him. The shepherd invited him to follow the mountain path. Together, they climbed slowly. After some time, they reached a quiet meadow. The shepherd sat beside a large stone. "This mountain has been here longer than anyone I have known," he said. Elias looked upward. "It seems eternal." The shepherd smiled. "Nothing we can see is truly unchanged." He picked up a small piece of stone. Rain changes mountains. Wind changes mountains. Snow changes mountains. Even the strongest rock slowly becomes dust. Elias looked at the stone in the shepherd's hand. He thought about human life. People often built homes and cities believing they would last forever. Kings built monuments. Generations built walls. People gave their names to roads and buildings. Yet, time slowly touched everything. The shepherd pointed toward a distant waterfall. Water looks weak, but give it enough time, and it can shape stone. Teo si, ayasan kenpo, pisantoiki. Elias smiled. Perhaps time itself was one of the greatest forces in existence. They continued upward. By evening, They reached a small mountain shelter. The shepherd prepared a simple meal: bread, cheese, fruit, and warm tea. They ate while watching the sunset. The clouds below them turned golden. For a few minutes, the entire valley seemed to glow.
Elias thought about how many people lived beneath those clouds. Most of them probably had no idea that this view existed. The shepherd looked toward the horizon. Beautiful, isn't it? Yes, Elias replied. The shepherd smiled. Then remember it. Why? Because beautiful moments do not stay. Elias understood. A sunset is beautiful precisely because it ends. A song is beautiful because it eventually becomes silent. A journey is meaningful because it eventually reaches another place. That night, Elias slept inside the small mountain shelter. Outside, the wind moved softly across the rocks. The stars appeared above the clouds. And for the first time, Elias felt as though he were sleeping between heaven and earth. The following morning, Elias descended from the mountains. After several days of walking, he reached a busy trading settlement. People had arrived from many distant lands. Some came from deserts, others from forests. Some had crossed mountains, others had traveled along rivers. The marketplace was filled with different languages, different clothes, different foods, different traditions. Elias walked slowly through the market. He saw merchants selling fabrics. A baker was preparing fresh bread. A craftsman was carving wood. A woman was arranging flowers. A traveler was repairing the straps of his camel. Everyone seemed different. Yet Elias noticed something. When someone was hungry, they wanted food. When someone was tired, they wanted rest. When someone was frightened, they wanted safety. When someone lost someone they loved, they felt sorrow. And when someone received kindness, they smiled. Perhaps these things belonged to every human being. That evening, Elias sat near a small fountain. A merchant from a distant land joined him. They did not speak the same language very well. Still, they managed to communicate. The merchant offered Elias tea. Elias offered him some fruit. Neither needed many words. They simply shared what they had. Elias thought about how strange and beautiful humanity was. People could disagree about many things. They could live thousands of miles apart. They could follow different traditions. Yet kindness needed no translation. A helping hand needed no translation. A smile needed no translation. A shared meal needed no translation. That night, the marketplace slowly became quiet. Lanterns remained glowing above the streets. Elias looked upward. The same stars were visible above every traveler, above every country, above
every village, above every home. Perhaps the sky was one of the few things humanity had always shared. Elias returned to his small room. Before sleeping, he whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, according to his own heart. Then he closed his eyes, and the marketplace became silent. The next day, Elias left the trading settlement. By afternoon, he reached a small desert village. The sun was hot. The ground was dry. There was very little shade. Elias was tired and hungry. Near the edge of the village, he saw a modest home. An elderly family lived there. They welcomed him inside. The woman of the house brought out a small loaf of bread. There was not much food. Elias hesitated. "You should keep it," he said. The woman smiled. "Bread tastes better when it is shared." They divided it into pieces. They ate together. The bread was simple, but Elias thought it was one of the finest meals he had ever received.
Afterward, the old man showed him a wooden container used to keep bread fresh. It had been made by his father, then passed to him. It was scratched and worn, but it had survived many years. Elias touched the carved wood. "Keep it," the old man said. "It has carried bread for many people." Elias thanked him. That evening, Elias carried the little wooden bread container with him. It became one of the first objects in his growing collection of memories. That night, he slept peacefully. The wind moved over the desert. The stars appeared, and somewhere far away, another traveler was probably sharing another simple meal. Days later, Elias met an elderly woodcarver. The craftsman's workshop smelled of cedar and dust. Small pieces of wood covered the floor. The old man was carving a beautiful box. Its surface contained delicate patterns. Inside the box, he kept several small objects: a mountain stone, a dried flower, a piece of old fabric, a tiny wooden figure. Elias asked why he kept such Things came back to him. The craftsman smiled. Because memories rarely need expensive objects. He picked up the stone. This came from the mountain where my father taught me to walk. Then he held the dried flower. This was given to my wife many years ago. Elias became quiet. The craftsman placed everything back into the box. People think they are collecting objects. Sometimes they are really collecting moments. The words stayed with Elias. Before leaving, the craftsman gave him a small carved memory box. Elias placed his mountain stone inside it. Then the dried flower. Then the little wooden bread container. His journey was becoming a collection of memories
That evening, he realized something important. One day, he might lose every object, but the moments connected to them would remain inside him. He placed the box beside his bed. Elias eventually reached a vast desert. During the day, the land seemed endless. Golden sand stretched toward the horizon. There were no trees, no buildings, no roads. Only wind and silence. But when night arrived, the desert became completely different. The heat disappeared. The air became cool. And the sky seemed enormous. Elias lay beside his small campfire. He looked upward. There were more stars than he could count. For a long time, he said nothing. He simply watched. The stars reminded him that the earth was not the center of everything he could imagine. There were countless worlds beyond his sight. Perhaps countless mysteries beyond human understanding. Elias felt very small. But strangely, he also felt peaceful. Being small did not make his life meaningless. Instead, it reminded him that life was precious. He closed his eyes. The fire became smaller. The desert became silent. And beneath millions of stars, Elias slept. After leaving the desert, Elias reached an ancient city. Its markets were filled with silk, spices, pottery, tea, bread, wood carvings, and beautiful fabrics. People from distant lands walked through its streets. At sunset, hundreds of lanterns were lit. The city seemed to glow. Elias climbed onto an old stone terrace. From there, he could see the entire city. He imagined the generations that had lived there. Children had grown up in those streets. Families had celebrated weddings. Parents had raised children. Travelers had arrived. Others had left. Some had become wealthy. Some had struggled. Some had been forgotten. Yet the city continued. Elias realized that civilizations, like human lives, had beginnings and endings. Even the greatest cities could someday become ruins. That thought did not frighten him. It made him appreciate the city even more. He watched the lanterns until his eyes became heavy. That night, Elias sat alone in a quiet garden. A fountain flowed nearby. The moon was bright. He began thinking about the greatest questions of life. Who created the heavens? Why does life exist? Why are humans able to love? Why do we fear death? What happens after this life? And will the world itself one day come to an end?
Elias knew that people across the world had different beliefs, different sacred traditions, different ways of understanding the Creator and existence. He respected that. He did not believe that every mystery needed to become an argument. Some questions were invitations to humility. He looked toward the stars. Perhaps human knowledge was only a small lamp in an enormous darkness. And perhaps that was okay. He closed his eyes. The fountain continued flowing. The garden became quiet. And slowly,
Several days later, Elias reached an ancient ruin. Broken walls stood beneath the sky. Once people had lived there. Now, only silence remained. Elias walked through the old streets. He imagined merchants selling bread, children running through the alleys, families sitting together at night, people celebrating important days, people praying, people dreaming about the future. All of them had believed that tomorrow would come, and tomorrow had come, then another tomorrow, and another, until eventually their city became silent. Elias placed his hand on an old stone wall. Time had not destroyed everything. Some stones remained, some memories remained, some lessons remained. He understood that the world itself was always changing. Nothing visible was guaranteed to remain forever. The sun set behind the ruins, and Elias stayed there beneath the stars.
That night, Elias imagined a distant future. He imagined cities becoming empty, ancient roads disappearing beneath the earth, buildings becoming ruins, rivers changing their paths, forests growing where cities once stood. He imagined future generations looking at the remains of today's world and wondering who had once lived there. The thought was not frightening. It was quiet. Every age eventually gives way to another. Every generation eventually becomes history. And perhaps one day, the world as humans know it will also reach its final chapter. Elias did not pretend to know exactly when or how. That mystery belonged beyond human knowledge. Instead, he thought about the present. If tomorrow is uncertain, then today matters. If life is temporary, then kindness matters. If the world will someday change, then we should appreciate it while we are here. The wind moved gently through the ruins. Elias closed his eyes and slept.
Elias opened his memory box. Inside were only a few things: the mountain stone, the dried flour, the old bread container, a small piece of cloth. Nothing valuable in the eyes of a merchant, but to Elias, they contained an entire journey. He thought about what would happen to these objects one day. The wood would decay, the flour would disappear, the stone would eventually become dust. Even memories could fade. So what truly remained? Elias thought about the people he had met, the farmer who shared fruit, the boatman who taught him about the river, the shepherd who taught him about the mountain, the family who shared their bread, the craftsman who gave him the memory box. Those moments had changed him. Perhaps that was what remained. Not possessions, but what one person left inside another person's heart. A kind word, a helping hand, a lesson, a memory, a moment of forgiveness, a moment of love. Elias closed the box. For the first time, he understood why the old craftsman had called it a memory box. It was not really a box for objects. It was a box for stories. Elias finally reached a high hill overlooking the land. He could see mountains, rivers, forests, distant villages, and far beyond them, the endless horizon. He built a small fire, then he sat quietly. There was nothing left to hurry toward. For the first time in many months, Elias simply rested. He thought about his journey. He had travelled through deserts, mountains, villages, markets, ruins. He had met people with different languages and traditions, yet every person had taught him something. The world was temporary, life was precious, kindness mattered, and mystery was not something to fear. Sometimes mystery was something to appreciate. Elias looked toward the stars. He remembered the first night of his journey. It seemed so long ago, but the same stars were still there. He smiled. Perhaps his journey had never really been about reaching a particular destination. Perhaps it had been about learning how to see the world, to see other people, to see himself, and perhaps to see the Creator's greatness through the beauty of creation, according to his own faith and understanding. The fire became smaller, the wind became softer. Elias wrapped himself in his blanket. The night was peaceful. Tomorrow would come, but tomorrow could wait. Tonight, he would sleep. Before sunrise, Elias woke. The world was still dark. He stood at the edge of the hill. For a few moments, everything was silent. Then the horizon began to change. A thin line of light appeared. The darkness slowly became blue, then purple, then gold. The first rays of sunlight touched the distant mountains. Elias watched without speaking. He had seen many sunrises during his life, but this one felt different. He thought about the people he had met, the river, the mountain, the desert, the ancient city, the old ruins, the bread that had been shared, the little stone, the dried flower, the wooden memory box. All of it had become part of his story. He realized that he did not need to know every answer. He only needed to live carefully with the knowledge he had, to appreciate the world, to respect other people, to help when he could, to forgive when possible, to remain humble before the mysteries of existence, and to remember that life was a journey. The sun rose higher, birds began singing, the valley slowly woke. Somewhere below, a river continued its ancient journey. Elias picked up his walking staff. He looked one final time toward the horizon. Then he smiled. The journey had ended, but the morning had begun, and perhaps every ending was simply the beginning of another chapter. The world would continue changing. Generations would come, generations would leave. Cities would rise, cities would fall. Mountains would slowly change. Rivers would continue flowing. And one day, far beyond the understanding of any single human being, the world as we know it would also reach its final moment. But that moment was not today. Today, the sun was shining, the birds were singing, the river was flowing, and life was still here. So there was no need to fear tomorrow. For now, there was only this morning, this breath, this moment, this beautiful and mysterious world. Elias closed his eyes for a moment and offered a quiet prayer of gratitude. Then he began walking, slowly, peacefully, toward the road ahead. And as the sunlight spread across the ancient land, the story became quieter and quieter, until only the gentle sound of wind remained. The journey was over, the night had passed, and a new morning had begun.